Has there ever been a moment at a family gathering where you genuinely could not tell whether someone was talking to you or to the person sitting next to you? You turn your head, make eye contact, and still cannot piece together what was just said. So you do what feels safest. You smile, say something general, and hope it landed right. If that has happened to you more than once, there is a reason for it, and it is not what most people assume. In the next few minutes, I'll explain what's actually happening, why it shows up in moments like this, and what you can do to make conversations easier to follow. Family gatherings used to be easy. You could hold 3 conversations at once, follow the crossfire of everyone talking over each other, and still catch the funny thing your grandson said from across the room. At some point, without any clear turning point, that stopped being true. It didn't happen dramatically. There was no moment where you suddenly couldn't hear. It was more like a slow fade. One holiday, you noticed you kept asking your son-in-law to repeat himself. The next one, you chose a seat closer to whoever was speaking. Then at some point you realized you were actively avoiding the loud end of the table altogether because the effort of keeping up there had just become too much. What's interesting is that most people going through this describe it the same way. Not as a hearing problem, but as a people problem. Everyone else seems to be speaking too quickly or not speaking clearly enough, or the house is just too echoey, or the kids are too loud. The explanation keeps changing because the real explanation hasn't been identified yet. There's actually a well-studied phenomenon in auditory science called the cocktail party effect. It refers to the brain's ability to lock onto one voice in a noisy environment and filter everything else out. For most of your life, your brain did this without any effort on your part. You just listened, and the right voice came through. What research tells us is that this filtering ability is one of the first things to break down when high-frequency hearing starts to change. A study published in the Journal of the Acoustical Society of America found that older adults with even mild high-frequency hearing loss showed significantly reduced ability to separate a target voice from competing background noise, even when the overall volume of the conversation was adequate. In other words, it wasn't that the sound wasn't loud enough, it was that the brain could no longer cleanly separate it from everything else happening in the room. Family gatherings are essentially the worst possible environment for someone experiencing this. Multiple voices at different distances, children with naturally higher pitched voices, overlapping conversations, background music, kitchen sounds. Every single one of those elements is working against the exact ability your ears are struggling with. Here is something that rarely gets talked about openly. When you consistently miss parts of conversations at family gatherings, the people closest to you start to adjust their behavior around you, often without realizing they're doing it. Your adult children start briefing you separately after the fact. Your spouse begins answering questions directed at you. People stop telling you certain stories because the back and forth required to get through them feels like too much effort for everyone involved. These adjustments are made out of love, but over time they quietly shift the dynamic. You move from being a full participant in your family's conversations to being someone who is kept updated on them afterward. A large-scale study from the National Institute on Aging followed adults over several years and found that untreated hearing difficulty was one of the strongest predictors of loneliness and social withdrawal in older adults. Stronger even than mobility issues or chronic pain. The researchers noted that the social nature of hearing makes it uniquely tied to a person's sense of connection and belonging. When hearing becomes effortful, social engagement becomes effortful, and people gradually do less of it. Most people assume that when hearing changes, everything just gets quieter uniformly. But that's not how it works for the vast majority of people. What typically happens is that a very specific slice of the sound spectrum is affected first, the range between 2,000 and 8,000 hertz, which is exactly where the sounds that give speech its definition live. Think about the difference between words like thin and fin or vine and nine. The only thing separating those words from each other is a brief, high-pitched consonant sound at the very beginning. When that frequency range is reduced, those distinctions collapse. You hear sound, but the edges that make words identifiable are gone. Now add a room full of competing voices and background noise on top of that. The background noise doesn't just fill the space around the speech. It actively buries those already fragile high-frequency sounds, making them completely unrecoverable by the time they reach your brain. Your brain then does its best to guess from context, which works sometimes and fails other times. And the effort of doing that continuously across an entire evening is what leaves you feeling completely depleted by the time you get home. Understanding this is the starting point. Once you realize this is a clarity issue, not just getting older or people mumbling, you stop guessing and you can actually take the right next step. If this has matched what you've been dealing with at family gatherings, head to the description. I've linked Hear Direct Club there so you can see the options built for real life conversations without the clinic runaround or the thousands of dollars people usually expect. And if you want more simple, practical videos like this, TV dialogue, restaurants, family conversations, subscribe. We're posting guides that help you hear clearly again.